London, summer of 1771. In the coffee houses along London's streets, from Lloyd's Coffee House to Jonathan's, gentlemen and ladies were whispering about the strangest story of the century. Not about war, not about politics, not about royal scandals, but about one single question. Is the Chevalier d'Eon a man or a woman? Coins were placed on tables. Papers were signed. At the London Stock Exchange, bankers began accepting official bets, odds 3-2, that it was a woman. According to the London Evening Post, by May 1771, the total amount wagered had exceeded £60,000, an enormous sum for that era. All of Europe was betting on one person's gender. There was a time in European history when people bet on a person's gender, not an actor, not an ordinary impostor, but a spy for France, a swordsman who had fought in the 7 Years' War, a diplomat who had negotiated the Treaty of Paris, a person who had served King Louis XV, a person who had lived their entire life in an identity that did not belong to them. Their full name was Charles Geneviève Louis Auguste André Timothée d'Eon de Beaumont, but the world called them Chevalier d'Eon. 3 questions have haunted d'Eon's name for more than 2 centuries. Was d'Eon a man or a woman? Was he a brilliant spy or a victim of politics? Did he choose his own fate, or was he deprived of the right to choose? The answers to these questions are not simple, because d'Eon's story is not one of clear choices. It is the story of a life pulled between power, identity, and control. If the whole world does not allow you to be yourself, what do you have left? That is the central question of d'Eon's life, and to understand it, we must start from the beginning. On the 5th of October 1728, in the town of Tonnerre, in the wine-famous Burgundy region, a child was born into an impoverished noble family. Recorded as male at birth, named Charles Geneviève Louis Auguste André Timothée d'Eon de Beaumont. The father was a lawyer and director of the king's domains, later becoming mayor of Tonnerre. The mother was the daughter of a commissary general in the wars in Spain and Italy. The family had noble prestige, but no money. And this child, d'Eon, would become one of the strangest figures of the 18th century. From a young age, d'Eon displayed outstanding talent. In 1743, at age 15, d'Eon moved from Tonnerre to Paris. In 1749, at age 21, d'Eon graduated in civil law and canon law at Collège Mazarin, one of the most prestigious universities in Paris. But d'Eon was not just a scholar. d'Eon was also a political writer, published 2 works on France's financial and administrative systems in 1753, attracting attention in intellectual circles. An outstanding swordsman, trained in fencing from childhood, becoming one of the best swordsmen of the era. A talented diplomat, sharp, intelligent, able to blend into any environment. And one more important thing, d'Eon had an androgynous appearance, features that were ambiguous between male and female. A delicate face, not a tall stature. These features would later become d'Eon's greatest weapon. d'Eon was not weak, he was dangerous. In 1756, when d'Eon was 28 years old, their life changed completely. d'Eon was recruited into the Secret du Roi, the King's Secret, a secret spy network directly run by King Louis XV, operating parallel to, and sometimes in opposition to, the official French government. This was not an ordinary intelligence agency. The Secret du Roi sometimes pursued policies that contradicted official policy and France's treaties. It was the king's personal spy network, known only to a trusted few, and d'Eon was one of them. First mission, Russia. According to d'Eon's memoirs, though no documentary evidence fully supports it, King Louis XV sent d'Eon along with Chevalier Douglas, a Scottish noble serving France, on a secret trip to Russia to meet Empress Elizabeth and conspire with the pro-French faction against the Habsburgs. The problem was, England and France were in a state of tension. The English were trying to prevent the French from reaching the Empress by allowing only women and children to cross the border into Russia. According to Dion's later account, they had to disguise as women to pass English controls. If discovered, Dion would have been executed. Dion went under the identity of Leah de Beaumont, a woman, and served as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Elizabeth. Many historians doubt this story, suggesting that Dion may have exaggerated experiences at Empress Elizabeth's famous metamorphosis balls, masquerade parties where cross-gender expression was celebrated. But whatever the truth, one thing is certain: Dion succeeded in the mission. Dion transported highly secret letters between King Louis XV at Versailles and Empress Elizabeth in St. Petersburg. In the world of espionage, identity is merely a tool. In September 1756, Frederick the Great of Prussia invaded Saxony, starting the 7 Years' War, the global conflict between England and France. Dion was recalled and served as captain of dragoons. And Dion was not just a staff officer sitting behind a desk. Dion fought directly, renowned as a brave warrior. At the Battle of Willinghausen, Dion was wounded, but Dion's merits were recognized. In June 1763, after the war ended, Dion was awarded the Order of St. Louis, a prestigious military honor, accompanied by a generous pension and the title Chevalier, equivalent to knight in French. At age 35, Dion had been knighted, was an experienced diplomat, was a seasoned warrior, was a trusted spy for the king. But this was also when everything began to go downhill. Mission in London. In September 1762, while the war was still ongoing, King Louis XV sent Dion to London as part of the diplomatic delegation to negotiate peace. On the 10th of February 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, ending the 7 Years' War. Dion played an important role in these negotiations. Afterward, Dion was appointed chargé d'affaires, temporary ambassador in London. But Dion also received another secret mission from the Secret du Roi: identify locations for France to invade England by sea. Yes, while the two nations publicly declared peace, King Louis XV was secretly preparing for an invasion. And Dion, both public diplomat and secret spy, had to carry out these two contradictory tasks. To gain access to the English aristocracy, Dion hosted lavish parties, imported fine wines from his native Burgundy, and accumulated enormous bills. But the French government criticized Dion for importing too much wine and spending excessively. In 1763, when the official ambassador position was given to another, Count de Guerchy, Dion refused to resign and hand over the work. Relations between Dion and the French government began to deteriorate, and Dion, with a proud and unyielding temperament, decided to fight back. Dion did not just know too much, he knew his own worth. In 1764, Dion published a shocking book. This book revealed secret diplomatic letters, embarrassing powerful figures, but did not fully expose the existence of the secret du Roi spy network and the king's plan to invade England. Dion knew that these plans could cause war, and Dion used them as a weapon. Dion sent an extraordinary threatening letter. If I do not receive a signed promise from the king or from Comte de Broglie that the entire affair with M. de Guerchy has been resolved, then I will formally and honestly declare that all hope is lost for me. And by forcing me into the hands of the King of England, his Prime Minister, and the Lords, it is clear that you will decide the fate of the next war, which I am certain I will be the innocent author of, a war that will be unavoidable. This was blackmail on an international level. Dion was threatening the King of France, and it worked. In 1766, King Louis XV granted Dion an annual pension of 12,000 livres, a large sum, in exchange for silence and for Dion to continue spying from London. But Dion was not allowed to return to France. Dion possessed the king's secret letters, providing protection against further actions. But Dion could not return home safely. Dion had become a political exile in London, and this is when the story becomes strange. In 1770, a rumor began spreading throughout London. The Chevalier Dion was actually a woman disguised as a man. No one knew where the rumor started, perhaps from political rivals, perhaps from those who met Dion and noticed the gender-ambiguous appearance. Perhaps, some historians believe, Dion himself started the rumor. But once it began, it did not stop. A French noble wrote to a friend, "The whole world is saying so. The final irrefutable proof." King Louis XV even wrote to a general in 1770, "Do you know that Dion is a girl?" In 1771, the speculation reached a fever pitch. The London Stock Exchange, began accepting official bets on Dion's gender. Initial odds, 3-2 that Dion was a woman. Bankers opened betting books. Aristocrats placed money. By May 1771, according to the London Evening Post, the total wager exceeded £60,000, a huge sum, equivalent to millions of pounds today. Newspapers printed caricatures of Dion, half man, half woman. Coffee houses were filled with debates. Young ladies' diaries recorded speculations. Dion could not leave the house without armed bodyguards, not to protect against assassins, but to protect against those who wanted to tear Dion's clothes off to see. On the 23rd of March, 1771, Dion, in Captain of Dragoons uniform, arrived at a tavern near the Stock Exchange in a rage and confronted a banker named Bird, the first to accept bets on the issue, challenging him to a duel. On the 29th of June, 1771, Dion swore before the Lord Mayor of London at City Hall. First, not to participate in betting on his own gender. Second, not to accept bribes. Third, absence from London was not at anyone's suggestion. But this oath did not resolve the question, and the betting continued. All of Europe did not ask what he thought. They only wanted to know what kind he was. In 1774, King Louis XV died. His grandson, Louis XVI, ascended the throne at age 20. The young king wanted to clean up the mess left by his grandfather, and one of the biggest messes was Chevalier Dion. Dion was still in London, still holding dangerous secrets, still receiving a pension from France, and still at the center of Europe's biggest gender scandal. Louis XVI sent the playwright and spy Beaumarchais to London to negotiate with Dion. Beaumarchais offered a deal. Dion could return to France. Dion would receive unpaid debts. Dion would continue to receive the pension. But there was one condition. Dion must live as a woman, permanently. This was not a suggestion. It was an order. Official reason: if Dion was a woman, as rumored, then Dion disguising as a man in the past was a deception that shamed the French royal family. To save face, Dion must be officially declared a woman and live as such. Real reason: by forcing Dion to live as a woman, in an era when women had no political power, could not hold military or diplomatic positions, Louis XVI neutralized Dion as a threat. A woman could not be a knight, could not be a captain, could not be a diplomat, could not be a threat. Professor Gary Cates, a historian specializing in Dion, explains, Louis XVI had motives to make Dion happy. He was a young king, newly ascended, and had to clean up the mess left by his grandfather. Dion, impoverished, isolated, and under debt pressure, agreed. On the 21st of November 1777, Mademoiselle la Chevalier Dion was officially presented at the Versailles court. Reborn after a 4-hour preparation including powdered hair and an elaborate evening gown made by Marie Antoinette's personal dressmaker. From that moment, Dionne's gender no longer belonged to Dionne. It belonged to the state. Dionne had lived 49 years as a man and would live 33 years as a woman. But there was a problem. The life of an 18th century noblewoman was extremely boring, especially for someone who had been a warrior, spy, and famous diplomat. In 1778, when France supported the colonies in the American Revolution, Dionne petitioned to be allowed to return to military uniform and assemble an all-female regiment to fight England. The government suggested Dionne enter a convent. When Dionne continued to demand, Dionne was arrested and imprisoned. Disappointed with life in France, Dionne returned to London, perhaps to escape the strict life of an unmarried, not wealthy noblewoman at court. In London, Dionne continued writing and collecting a large library of early feminist works. Dionne wrote critiques of gender and analyses of differences between men and women, even arguing that women had greater virtue than men, especially regarding Christian faith. But Dionne still continued fencing. And here is something strange. Dionne fenced in dresses. In 1787, a famous fencing match between Monsieur de Saint-Georges and Mademoiselle la Chevalier d'Eon took place at Carlton House. The audience was stunned to see a woman of 59 fence so excellently. Dionne became a celebrity, not for diplomatic or military talent, but for the mystery of gender. And this was the tragedy. Everything Dionne had done, serving the country, fighting in war, negotiating peace, was overshadowed by the question of gender. In 1789, the French Revolution broke out. King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were overthrown. Dionne's pension from France was cut. All royal payments stopped. Dionne, now around 60 years old, suddenly fell into poverty. No money, no position, no longer political value. To survive, Dionne sold books from the precious library. Dionne organized public fencing exhibitions, an elderly woman fencing before crowds for money. This was a brutal fall. From a respected diplomat, brave warrior, trusted spy, to a circus act. In 1796, during an exhibition, Dionne fell and was seriously injured. Afterward, Dionne gradually became paralyzed. Dionne spent the final years bedridden, cared for by a widow named Mrs. Mary Cole at New Millman Street, Holborn. The two lived together for 14 years. Mrs. Cole cared for Dionne, and according to all records, Mrs. Cole believed Dionne was a woman. In 1805, Dionne received an advance from a publisher to write memoirs. Dionne wrote, "Many believe," with some fictionalization, but it was never published. When the state no longer needs you, your identity also loses value. On the 21st of May, 1810, at 10 p.m., Chevalier Dionne died at age 81, in poverty in London. Mrs. Cole, who had cared for Dionne for 14 years, prepared the body for burial. And then she discovered something that shocked her so much she had to call medical experts. Dionne had male genitalia. Thomas Copeland, a surgeon, examined the body and declared, "I certify that I have examined and dissected the body of Le Chevalier d'Eon and found the male genital organs in every aspect perfectly formed." Copeland's comment that Dionne's genitalia were perfectly formed was not just flowery prose. In the language of the time, Copeland meant that Dionne was not intersex. The news spread like wildfire. Those who had bet male won. Those who had bet female lost. Newspapers seized the story. They portrayed Dionne as one of the greatest impostors in history, an actor who made everyone believe something completely untrue. Author Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, later wrote about Dionne in his 1910 book Famous Impostors. In the 19th century, Dionne's story was told as one of deception, a lifetime of suspicion, and even in death, he was not left in peace. So who was Chevalier Dionne? This is the question that, more than 2 centuries later, we are still trying to answer. In the 20th century, sexologist Havelock Ellis coined the term aeonism to describe the phenomenon of gender transition. In the 21st century, the transgender community has welcomed Dion as a pioneering icon. The Beaumont Society, a support organization for the transgender community in the UK, is named after Dion's Beaumont family name. But was Dion transgender in the modern sense? This is a complex question, because we are applying 21st century language and concepts to a person who lived in the 18th century, an era with completely different conceptions of gender. In the 18th century, based on medical theory from ancient Greece, people believed that biological sex existed on a continuum, not two separate categories. Accordingly, male biological traits could appear in women under suitable environmental factors, and vice versa. But one thing is certain: Dion was not allowed to choose for himself. When Dion lived as a man for the first 49 years, was that Dion's choice? Or was it the only way to study, fight, and become a diplomat? When Dion was forced to live as a woman for the last 33 years, was that Dion's choice? Or was it an order from the state? Professor Gary Cates argues that Dion may have started the gender rumor himself as a way to escape the political life he no longer wanted. But even if true, Dion's choice was still limited by the options society and the state allowed. Some historians, like Simon Burrows, believe that Dion may have taken money from bookmakers to keep the gender secret, a way to earn money when falling into financial difficulty. But whatever the motive, the result was Dion's gender became a political weapon, a money-making tool, and ultimately a prison. The greatest tragedy of Dion was not who he was, but that he was never asked. A rainy night in London, Milman Street silent. In 1810, when Dion died, there was no grand funeral, no representatives from the French government, no former diplomatic colleagues, no crowd to see off, only Mrs. Cole and a few friends. Dion's grave at St. Pancras Old Church has been lost. Today, Dion's name is only recorded on the Burdett Coutts Memorial, a plaque commemorating those buried in the old cemetery. But Dion left behind more than 2,000 pages of unpublished documents, including manuscripts for a memoir with some imagined storytelling, and a legacy still discussed today among scholars and historians. Some view Dion as the founder of the transgender community and an explorer of gender identity. But perhaps the truest way to understand Dion is not to view Dion as man or woman, transgender or cisgender, hero or imposter, but to view Dion as a human being deprived of the right to self-determination. Dion lived in a world where gender determined opportunity. Identity could become a political weapon. A person could be forced to live in the way the state decided. Even after death, the body was not left in peace. Early feminist Mary Wollstonecraft praised Dion as proof that women could excel over men if given the opportunity. 19th century biographers claimed Dion only cross-dressed to seduce married women. The 20th century analyzed Dion in psychosexual terms. The 21st century sees Dion as a transgender hero. Each era projects a different meaning onto Dion, but perhaps the simplest truth is, Dion was not allowed to be himself, whatever himself was. Chevalier Dion was not genderless. He was the person who was never allowed to choose his own gender. Today, when we look back at the story of Chevalier Dion, we see a story that goes beyond gender. This is a story about power, the power to define another person's identity, the power to use people as tools, the power to deprive the right to self-determination. Dion was a genius, scholar, diplomat, warrior, spy, writer, swordsman. But all those achievements were overshadowed by a question that Dion was not allowed to answer himself. Who was he? In a world where gender determined everything, the right to work, to own property, to participate in politics, personal freedom, Dion was trapped between two worlds and belonged to neither. When living as a man, Dion had power, but had to hide himself. When forced to live as a woman, Dion lost power, but still was not allowed to be himself. Dion's tragedy was not about gender identity. Dion's tragedy was about the absence of choice. And that is why, more than 2 centuries after his death, we still tell the story of Dion. Because every time a person is deprived of the right to self-determination, every time identity becomes a political weapon, every time power decides who you are allowed to be, we remember Chevalier Dion. Chevalier Dion did not die from war, not from betrayal. He died because his whole life he had to live in someone else's role.